Okay, so a couple of problems to help you with the quiz. Remember, you're looking for patterns and you're going to use your flow chart. So our first step for the flow chart is to look for the greatest common factor. And for number 1, there is not a greatest common factor. So then I have 3 methods that I can choose from when it comes to 3 terms. And remember, those 3 methods, when you have 3 terms, are either logic, reverse FOIL, grouping, or slide and divide. So go ahead and pick your favorite method. I'm going to show you all 3 and talk about all 3 here in a minute. So the first method I'm going to show you is using logic. And logic works really well when you have prime numbers as your A and your C. It works all the time, but it's definitely easiest when there's prime numbers. So remember, it's called reverse FOIL, and you're going to look at how would you break down this first term. And the only way you could would be 2x times x. Then you have your -3, and you have to think about, for -3, where would you place? It could be -3 and +1, or +3 and -1. And we have 2 options where we can put the items, and we have to make sure where we place it is going to add up to -5. So we can guess and check. We can make our best options based on logic. And right away, I'm thinking I have to put the 3 here and the 1 here because I want it to be 6x and 1x. And then I'm going to be thinking about my sign. And I want it to be -5x. So it would have to be a -3 and a +1. So it would be -6x plus 1x to get to -5x. And the best thing about logic is if you make a mistake when you go to check, you realize, oh, and then you just change it back. So that's logic. If you have trouble with that puzzle, there's 2 other methods for you to try. And the first one is the grouping that you learned tonight. And remember the steps for grouping. You multiply A times C, so 2 times -3 in this case would be -6. And then you think about what 2 numbers multiply to -6 and are going to add up to -5. So that would be -6 and +1. When you multiply them, they're -6, and when you add them, they add up to -5. Okay, once you determine that, now you're going to do a little ungrouping, and what you want to do is take this -5x. It has to still equal -5x, but we're going to change it to -6x and +x. And note, if we combine that, it would be -5x. But by ungrouping this, it's going to allow us to factor easier. So the first term stays the same. We've ungrouped -5x and made it -6x and x. And our last stays the same. Now we just follow through with grouping. So we can change the order if we want. In this case, I feel like they're the best pairs that are set up here. And I'm going to factor out from this pair 2x. When I factor out 2x, I get x minus 3. And then my x minus 3 only has a common factor of 1. So we see that our parentheses are the same. So then we factor out x minus 3, and what's left over is our other factor, so 2x plus 1. So you can see we're getting the same answer. Our last method, it would be slide and divide. And remember, the slide and divide method is you multiply 2 times by -3. Again, the A times the C. And then we rewrite the problem. Now we factor out this easier problem, And we got x minus 6 and x plus 1. Then, since we slid the 2, we have to divide by it. So we divide both factors by 2. Then we simplify our fractions. So 6 divided by 2 is 3. And 1/2 is as simple as it can get. So our last step would then be to slide the 2 out in front. And obviously we would multiply to check. And all 3 methods got the same answer. So tomorrow for the quiz, you can use any of the methods when it comes to our trinomials. Just make sure you factor out the greatest common factor first. Okay, so let's look at number 2 and number 3 now. And always we're going to factor out a greatest common factor first. So if we look at number 2, 8 and 81 do not have a common factor. So we can't factor out a greatest common factor. So then we look and see how many terms there are. There are 2 terms left. So I'm looking for difference of squares, difference of cubes, or sum of cubes. So we have a difference here between our 2 terms. We have a subtraction. So it's either going to be difference of squares and difference of cubes to be factored. And it looks like we have a perfect square with 81. We do, because that's 9 times 9. X squared is perfect, but 8 is not. So it turns out that this cannot be factored at all, because 8 is not a perfect square, and everything has to be a perfect square if we're going to be able to factor using difference of squares. So our answer to number 2 is prime. It's not factorable. You can't divide anything out. It's prime. Okay, our last problem, number 3. Again, we're going to look for factor out our greatest common factor. And between 27 and 64, they don't have anything in common. Also, the x cubed is only in one term. So then again, we have 2 terms. So it could be a difference of squares, difference of cubes, or sum of cubes. We have a sum. So our only option, if we're going to factor this now, is a sum of cubes. And 27 we know is a perfect cube. So is 64, and so is x cubed. So we can factor, and we're going to use our notes, our day 3 notes, to factor the sum of cubes. So remember, our first step is we're going to write a little parentheses and a big one. Then we're going to take the cube root of both items. So our cube root of 27x cubed is 3x. Because remember, 3x times 3x times 3x would be equal to 27x cubed. So once we've determined that this is a perfect cube, we'll write in what the cube root is. Then our 64, we also determine that's also a perfect cubed. So the cube root of 64 is equal to 4, because remember, 4 times 4 times 4 is 64. So that gets right into our small parentheses. So just to remember that our first step is a little parentheses and a big one. Then we take the cube root of both items and we write them in. Then we get our signs down. So we have same sign. So same in this case, same is positive. Whatever's here is the first sign. Then our opposite sign. So opposite plus is minus. And then our last sign is always positive. Now the last thing we do is square smash square. So we're going to square 3x. So that means 3x times 3x. So 3x times 3x would be 9x squared. So that gets written here. Then we smash, we're going to multiply 3x times 4. So 3x times 4 would be 12x. I need to make some more room here. So we have 12x. And then our last would be to square our 4. So 4 squared is 16. Okay, so just to recap, our difference of cubes and sum of cube steps is we start with a little parentheses and a big one. Then we take the cube root of both items. So the cube root of 27x cubed is 3x. The cube root of 64 is 4. Then we get our signs down. Remember, it's SOP, our signs. So we have our same sign. It's a plus because that's that right there. Then our opposite. So whatever sign you put here for the same, you're going to put the opposite here. So the opposite of plus is minus. Then this last sign is always positive. Then we square, smash square. So we square 3x. So 3x squared is 3x times 3x. So that's 9x squared. Then we smash. 3x times 4 is 12x. And that's why that sign had to be down there before we get the wrong sign. And then we square 4. So 4 times 4 is 16. If you need any more help, feel free to watch the first video, the day 3 videos that talk about each topic separately, and work through your practice, day 3 practice problems again. Have a great night.